My sister made a toast to being an only child, so I stood up and made an announcement that changed everything forever. Please stay with me as I tell my story. My sister made a toast to being an only child, so I stood up and made an announcement that changed everything. It all started at a family gathering in our parents' house, the kind where every relative you haven't seen in years shows up and the table is crowded with food, laughter, and old stories. The clinking of glasses echoed through the dining room when Jessica, my older sister, rose to her feet with that same confident smirk she's worn since childhood. She tapped her glass, waited for silence, and proudly declared, "Here's to being the only child Mom and Dad ever needed." For a moment, the room froze. I could see my cousins shift in their seats, their smiles faltering. A few people gave awkward chuckles, unsure if she was joking or serious. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I just sat there frozen. Her words weren't surprising to me. Not really. But hearing them out loud in front of everyone we knew hit harder than anything she had ever done before. My chest tightened, and my hands curled into fists under the table. That toast wasn't just a careless joke. It was the final straw after years of being erased, ignored, and dismissed. For as long as I could remember, Jessica had treated me as if I didn't belong. As if our parents had made some mistake by having me. She took every opportunity to remind me of it. Growing up, I learned to swallow the hurt, to hide my anger, and to live in the shadows of her so-called perfection. But that night, with all eyes on us, I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. What Jessica said at that table wasn't just cruel. It was the truth she had been living for years, at least in her own mind. And the worst part? My parents had let her believe it. They had fueled her arrogance by turning a blind eye whenever she pushed me aside, stole the spotlight, or undermined me. So when she raised her glass that night, she wasn't being funny. She was telling the story she thought everyone already knew, that she was the star and I was just a shadow. But as I sat there staring at her, something inside me shifted. I realized I had a choice. Stay quiet and let her words define me forever. Or finally stand up, reclaim my voice, and tell the truth in front of everyone who mattered. That was the moment I made my decision. And when I rose to my feet, I knew nothing in our family would ever be the same. When I think back to my childhood, I realized Jessica and I never stood on the same ground. We lived under the same roof, but it always felt like she owned the space while I was just allowed to stay there. From the earliest years, the difference in how we were treated was impossible to miss. She was the golden one, the child who could do no wrong, and I was the one whose efforts were barely noticed. If Jessica brought home a test with an A, our parents praised her like she had just solved some impossible puzzle. If I brought home the same grade, it was brushed aside with a quick nod or followed by a comparison to how Jessica did it better, faster, or with less effort. The same thing happened with sports. Jessica tried basketball and scored once in a season, and she was celebrated. I joined swimming, placed second in a race, and my parents asked why I didn't push harder to come first. The message was clear every time. Nothing I did could match her, even when it was equal or better. Jessica thrived on that attention. She knew she had their favor, and she used it like a weapon. When I was little, I thought sisters were supposed to stick together, to look out for each other. But Jessica seemed to see me as competition she needed to destroy. Whenever I made a friend, she found ways to pull them away from me. At first, it was small things, like making sure she was louder or more charming when they came over. But it didn't stop there. By middle school, she was spreading lies that I said mean things behind people's backs, or that I was jealous of her. Those rumors worked. Kids drifted away from me, choosing Jessica's circle instead. I can still remember one girl, Maya, who was my closest friend at the time. We did everything together until Jessica decided she wanted her too. Within a month, Maya was sitting at Jessica's lunch table, barely speaking to me. Later, I found out Jessica had told her I said Maya only hung around me because she had no other options. That cut deep because it wasn't just losing a friend. It was losing someone I trusted, and it was losing her to my own sister's lies. It kept happening over and over, no matter how careful I was. Jessica always found a way to chip away at what little I built for myself. At school, teachers favored her. At home, our parents defended her. In my life, her shadow swallowed any space I tried to claim. People like to brush things off as sibling rivalry, but this was never that. Rivalry means two people competing on the same terms. What Jessica did was cruelty wrapped in the excuse of competition. She didn't just want to win. She wanted me to lose so completely that I had nothing. And for a long time, I believed she was succeeding. My parents, David and Carol, played a bigger role in this story than they probably ever realized. They weren't cruel in the obvious sense, but their choices, the way they handled situations, made Jessica's behavior worse. Instead of guiding us fairly, they handed her power she didn't deserve and taught me that my voice didn't matter. Whenever I tried to stand up for myself, the answer was almost always the same. If I complained that Jessica took something of mine or hurt me, I was told I was jealous. If I explained how unfair things felt, they said I was overreacting. It didn't matter what the situation was. Their minds were made up before I even opened my mouth. They didn't want to hear my side because it was easier for them to believe Jessica could do no wrong. One memory stays sharp even now. I had worked hard on a small art project for school, something I was really proud of. Jessica accidentally spilled soda on it the night before it was due. I cried and told my parents what happened. Jessica claimed it was just a slip, that she didn't mean it. Instead of holding her accountable, they comforted her, saying, "Mistakes happen," and told me not to make such a big deal out of it. To me, it wasn't about the paper. It was about the fact that what I created didn't matter enough for them to protect. This pattern stretched across years. Broken belongings, stolen chances, constant cutting remarks. None of it was punished or even acknowledged. I stopped expecting fairness. I started to realize that in our house, Jessica could tear things apart, and I would be left picking up the pieces while being told I was too sensitive. That's how invisibility settled in. It's not sudden like someone turning off a light. It's slower, more painful. It's walking into a room and realizing no one sees you, even though you're standing right there. At birthdays, Jessica's wishes were always bigger, and mine were treated like afterthoughts. At holidays, if I unwrapped something I didn't like, I was scolded for being ungrateful, while Jessica's smallest complaints were quickly fixed. Over time, I stopped speaking up as much. There didn't seem to be a point in explaining what happened when the answer was always the same. That silence fed Jessica's confidence. She knew she had them wrapped around her finger, and she leaned into it more and more. She started acting as though she wasn't just the favorite child, but the only child who mattered at all. That favoritism carved out the space where her arrogance grew. Every dismissal, every time they took her side without question, was proof to her that I didn't belong on equal ground. It was like the family existed around her, and I was just a distant shadow standing nearby. And the longer it went on, the more I believed it too. As we got older, the gap between Jessica and me didn't close. It only grew wider. Childhood cruelty turned into something much bigger, and what she did during those years left scars I still feel today. The worst of it came when it was time for me to think about college. I had worked hard, kept my grades up, and planned to use the small fund my grandparents had set aside for both of us. That money was supposed to give me a fair start, but I never saw a cent of it. Jessica got there first. She convinced our parents that she needed the money more than I did. She told them she was aiming for medical school, that her success would reflect on the whole family, and that giving her the funds was the smarter choice. She painted me as someone who didn't have the same potential, someone who would figure it out eventually, and they believed her without hesitation. They handed it all over to her. I didn't even find out until the account was already emptied. By the time I asked about it, the decision was final. They sat me down and said it wasn't personal, that Jessica's future was more promising, and they couldn't split the money without hurting her chances. The words stung worse than I can explain. It wasn't just the money, it was what their choice said about how little faith they had in me. So while Jessica started medical school with everything handed to her, tuition covered, a brand new car, and a nice apartment close to campus, I was left scrambling. I enrolled in community college because it was the only thing I could afford, and even then I had to work double shifts at a restaurant just to keep up with tuition and rent. There were nights I dragged myself home exhausted, wondering how it was fair that I had to fight for scraps while my sister lived in comfort, funded by the same people who ignored me for years. The betrayal wasn't about losing out on opportunities alone. It was about realizing that the people who should have been my support system had chosen her yet again, this time in a way that affected the course of my entire life. It was about watching her flaunt the things that were supposed to help both of us, driving around in her shiny car, posting pictures from her new apartment, never once thinking about how it felt to see my future stripped away. That was the moment something hardened inside me. I understood then that waiting for fairness or expecting them to see me differently was pointless. If I wanted to reclaim any sense of worth, I would have to do it myself. And while I kept my head down and worked to survive, I promised myself one thing. One day, I would stand up, and they would all see the truth they had ignored for so long. Leaving home was the best decision I ever made. After everything that happened, I knew I couldn't keep living in the same town, carrying the same weight. So I packed up what little I had and moved to Portland. It wasn't far, but it was far enough that I could finally breathe without Jessica's shadow following. Starting over wasn't easy, but it gave me a chance to build a life that belonged to me. I enrolled in physical therapy school, knowing it wouldn't be simple. The classes were demanding. The hours were long and money was always tight. But for the first time, I felt like every step forward was mine and mine alone. I didn't owe it to my parents. I didn't owe it to Jessica. I was working for myself. Every shift at the hospital cafeteria, every late night of studying, every exam I passed reminded me that I was stronger than they ever gave me credit for. The biggest change came from the people I met. For years, I thought friendship was something that could be taken from me, something fragile that someone like Jessica could ruin. But in Portland, I found people who saw me for who I was and welcomed me without conditions. My classmates, especially a few who became close friends, treated me like I mattered. They cheered when I succeeded, comforted me when I failed, and never once made me feel like I had to earn their loyalty. It was the first time I experienced the feeling of having a chosen family. Those friendships filled a part of me that had been empty for years. We cooked meals together, celebrated birthdays, and studied late into the night. They didn't compare me to anyone else. They didn't dismiss my feelings. Being around them showed me what real support looked like, something I never got in my own home. It gave me the strength to believe that I wasn't the problem. I had just been surrounded by people who refused to see my worth. Still, even with that new sense of belonging, there were nights when the past came back to me. I'd lie awake thinking about the money that should have been mine, the years I had lost, the way Jessica always seemed to get away with everything. I tried to focus on moving forward, but the truth was, part of me carried that wound everywhere I went. No amount of success could erase the fact that she had stolen something that was meant for me and that my parents had let her do it. But instead of letting it break me, I used it as fuel. I told myself that every diploma, every paycheck, every small victory was proof that I could stand on my own without them. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their money. I was carving out a life with my own hands. And though I was proud of what I had built, a small part of me still waited for the day I could show them all what they had thrown away. Years passed before I saw most of my family again. By then, I had finished physical therapy school and was working steadily, keeping my distance from the people who had hurt me the most. I never expected an invitation to my parents' anniversary celebration, but one showed up in the mail. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part knew I had to go. Avoiding them forever wouldn't erase the past. So with nerves I tried to push down, I decided to attend. The reunion was bigger than I imagined. The house was filled with cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, uncles swapping stories in the kitchen, and even old neighbors who had known us since we were kids. The air buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and music. I stood quietly near the edge of the room, trying to blend in when I spotted Jessica. She hadn't changed at all. She still carried herself like she was the center of everything, moving from group to group with that same polished smile, talking about her career as if she was the only one with anything worth sharing. It was like stepping back into the same nightmare I thought I had escaped. While I had worked for every inch of progress in my life, she was still the one everyone seemed to admire without question. She boasted about her achievements, slipped in stories about how grateful she was to our parents, and carried herself as though the years had only confirmed what she always believed, that she was the daughter who mattered most. Dinner was served, and the long table filled with plates, drinks, and chatter. I sat across from her trying to steady myself, telling myself I could get through one evening without losing control. But Jessica never made things that simple. Halfway through the meal, she picked up her glass, tapped it lightly with her fork, and waited until the room grew silent. No amount of success could erase the fact that she had stolen something that was meant for me, and that my parents had let her do it. But instead of letting it break me, I used it as fuel. I told myself that every diploma, every paycheck, every small victory was proof that I could stand on my own without them. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their money. I was carving out a life with my own hands. And though I was proud of what I had built, a small part of me still waited for the day I could show them all what they had thrown away. Years passed before I saw most of my family again. By then, I had finished physical therapy school and was working steadily, keeping my distance from the people who had hurt me the most. I never expected an invitation to my parents' anniversary celebration. But one showed up in the mail. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but another part knew I had to go. Avoiding them forever wouldn't erase the past. So with nerves I tried to push down, I decided to attend. The reunion was bigger than I imagined. The house was filled with cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, uncles swapping stories in the kitchen, and even old neighbors who had known us since we were kids. The air buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and music. I stood quietly near the edge of the room, trying to blend in when I spotted Jessica. She hadn't changed at all. She still carried herself like she was the center of everything, moving from group to group with that same polished smile, talking about her career as if she was the only one with anything worth sharing. It was like stepping back into the same nightmare I thought I had escaped. While I had worked for every inch of progress in my life, she was still the one everyone seemed to admire without question. She boasted about her achievements, slipped in stories about how grateful she was to our parents, and carried herself as though the years had only confirmed what she always believed, that she was the daughter who mattered most. Dinner was served, and the long table filled with plates, drinks, and chatter. I sat across from her, trying to steady myself, telling myself I could get through one evening without losing control. But Jessica never made things that simple. Halfway through the meal, she picked up her glass, tapped it lightly with her fork, and waited until the room grew silent. Her voice rang out clear and proud. Here's to being the only child Mom and Dad ever needed. For a moment, no one seemed to breathe. A few people let out uncomfortable laughs, maybe thinking it was a joke, but most looked around in shock. The silence stretched, heavy and painful, and I felt it like a punch in the chest. Those words cut through me, sharper than anything I had felt in years. It didn't matter how far I'd come, or how much I'd built for myself. The moment she said it, I was that same invisible girl again, erased in front of everyone. I stared at her, heart pounding, my stomach tight. She smirked as if she had just said something clever, completely unaware, or maybe fully aware, of the damage it caused around the table. Eyes darted toward me, some curious, some sympathetic, waiting to see how I would respond. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my shaking hands. Once again, Jessica had made her move. And deep inside, I knew it was time for me to make mine. My hands were trembling under the table, but something inside me refused to let her words hang in the air unanswered. I pushed my chair back, the scrape of wood against the floor making heads turn. Slowly, I rose to my feet. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might give out, but I kept my eyes locked on Jessica. The room grew quiet again as everyone waited. My voice shook at first, but I forced it louder. I am not invisible. I am not less of a daughter. I'm the one who gave up everything because Jessica took what wasn't hers. Murmurs rippled through the room. Forks paused in midair. Jessica's smile wavered. I swallowed hard and kept going. I told them about the college fund, how it had been set aside for both of us, how Jessica convinced our parents she deserved it all, and how I was left with nothing. I explained how I had worked double shifts to keep myself in school while she enjoyed the comforts that money was meant to provide for us both. Gasps spread around the table. A few relatives exchanged glances, eyes widening as if they couldn't believe what they were hearing. My parents shifted in their seats, faces stiff, but I didn't stop. For years I had carried the weight of silence, and I wasn't going to back down now. I told them about the lies Jessica had spread when we were younger, how she had taken friends from me with stories that weren't true. I explained how every time she broke something of mine or pushed me aside, she was never punished, only excused, and how each time I spoke up, I was told I was jealous or making things up. As the words poured out, my voice grew steadier. For the first time, I wasn't hiding. I wasn't shrinking. I was telling the truth, plain and clear, in front of the people who had only ever seen the version of Jessica she wanted them to see. I could see the shift happening around me. My uncle leaned back with a stunned look. My cousin shook her head in disbelief. Even old neighbors, who had always spoken so highly of Jessica, now looked at her differently. The image she had built so carefully was cracking, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. When I finally stopped speaking, the silence was deafening. Every eye in the room turned toward Jessica. Her face, usually so confident and smug, had gone pale. Her mouth opened as if she wanted to argue, but no words came out. For once, she had no script to hide behind. I sat back down, my hands still shaking, but lighter than they had ever felt. I had spoken the truth, and judging by the faces around the table, No one would ever look at Jessica the same way again. The silence after I sat down was heavy, like the whole room was holding its breath. Then, almost all at once, voices broke through. My uncle leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Is this true? Did you really let Jessica take everything from Emma?" Another cousin added quickly. "Wait, the fund was supposed to be for both of them, wasn't it?" All eyes turned to my parents. My father shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. My mother tried to smile, as if it was just a misunderstanding. "It wasn't like that," she said weakly. "We only wanted what was best for both girls." But her words didn't land the way she hoped. My aunt frowned, shaking her head. "How is giving everything to one child what's best for both? That doesn't make sense." More murmurs filled the room. The questions came faster, sharper, harder to dodge. People wanted to know why I had to work myself through school while Jessica had everything handed to her. They wanted to know how long this favoritism had gone on. My father raised his voice, trying to keep control. Jessica was aiming higher, and we didn't want to risk her future. Emma managed fine on her own, but the excuse sounded hollow. Everyone could see it for what it was, favoritism dressed up as reasoning. Across the table, Jessica sat frozen, her face losing the smugness she had worn just minutes earlier. For years, she had basked in the admiration of relatives and neighbors. She was the star, the example everyone was told to follow. But now, the same people who once praised her were staring at her with open disbelief and even disgust. An older cousin shook his head. "I used to think you had it all because you worked harder, but now it's clear it was all handed to you." Another voice chimed in, "And you let them believe you were some kind of hero while your sister carried the burden alone." The room felt different now. The admiration Jessica thrived on was gone, replaced with judgment she had no defense against. She opened her mouth to argue, but the words stumbled. She muttered something about me exaggerating, but no one bought it. The damage was already done. My parents tried again to soften the blow, insisting Jessica deserved the opportunities she had, that they had only been trying to help. But the more they spoke, the worse it sounded. Their image as fair, loving parents cracked right there at the dinner table. Relatives who once respected them now looked disappointed, some even angry. For the first time, Jessica wasn't untouchable. She wasn't the golden child. She was exposed for what she had always been. Someone who took without guilt, backed by parents who allowed it, and there was no way to put the mask back on. Not after the truth had been spoken out loud in front of everyone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry or demand anyone take my side. After telling the truth, I simply sat down, folded my hands in my lap, and let the silence do its work. That quietness carried more weight than any outburst ever could. I wasn't begging for understanding, I wasn't asking for pity. I was showing them that I didn't need to fight anymore because the truth had already spoken for itself. Across from me, Jessica shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She tried to force a laugh, a sharp little sound meant to brush everything off like it was just a misunderstanding. "You all know how dramatic Emma can be," she said, her voice shaky under the fake smile. She always twists things to make herself look like a victim, but no one laughed with her. The faces around the table stayed cold, skeptical. The charm that had always worked for her no longer reached anyone. I lifted my chin and spoke again, calm and steady. I didn't twist anything. I worked through physical therapy school without a cent of help. I paid my rent, bought my books, covered my tuition, all while working long hours. I built a career on my own. And while I did that, Jessica had the car, the apartment, the tuition, all funded by the same people who told me I would manage. Whispers spread across the table. A cousin who worked in healthcare nodded knowingly. Physical therapy school isn't easy. Doing it while working, that's strength. Others murmured in agreement. The shift in the room was clear. For once, I wasn't the invisible one. I was being seen. Not as a victim, but as someone who had endured and succeeded despite everything stacked against me. Jessica tried again to argue, to reclaim control. So what? You managed, didn't you? You should be proud of yourself instead of blaming me. But her words sounded hollow. The more she tried to minimize what I said, the more obvious her guilt became. No one defended her. No one nodded in agreement. The silence after her words told her everything. She no longer had the admiration she was used to. The revenge wasn't about yelling or tearing her down in front of everyone. It was about showing her what she could never take away from me. She had stolen money, opportunities, even friendships. but she couldn't steal the strength I built by surviving it. I didn't need their approval to prove my worth. I had already done it by carving a life of my own without their help, without their praise. And as I looked around that table, seeing the doubt in their eyes when they glanced at her, I realized something. My quiet strength, my calm truth, had done what years of her boasting never could. It had shown everyone who she really was and who I had become in spite of her. That was the real revenge. After that night, things in my family were never the same again. The version of Jessica everyone once admired started to crumble. The relatives who used to sing her praises no longer looked at her with admiration. They looked at her with questions, with disappointment, even with anger. She wasn't the shining example anymore. She was someone who had been exposed, someone whose success wasn't as clean or earned as she had always made it seem. Word of what happened at that dinner spread quietly among the extended family. Nobody shouted about it, but people remembered. At later gatherings, I noticed the difference. Conversations didn't circle around Jessica like they used to. The spotlight that once followed her everywhere dimmed, and she seemed smaller without it. She tried to hold herself as proudly as before, but it was clear she felt the weight of what had been revealed. My parents, of course, tried to smooth things over. A week after the dinner, they called me, their voices unusually soft. They said they hadn't realized how deeply things had hurt me. They asked if we could move forward, if we could try to rebuild our relationship. But I wasn't the same girl who used to beg for their approval. I listened. I stayed calm, but inside, I knew the truth. They didn't want to rebuild for me. They wanted to fix the image of themselves that had cracked in front of everyone. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel desperate to hear their validation. I had already proved to myself that I could make it without them. Physical therapy had given me stability. My friends had given me love and support. And my own determination had carried me through every obstacle. I didn't need their praise or their excuses anymore. So when they asked if we could start fresh, I gave them a polite answer. But in my heart, I had already moved on. What mattered most was how I walked away from that night. I didn't storm out, I didn't break down. I left with my head high, my shoulders steady, and the knowledge that my voice had finally been heard. Jessica was left to deal with the fallout of her own cruelty, her own lies, her own choices. I didn't have to lift another finger against her. Her actions had caught up to her all on their own. That announcement, those words I finally spoke, were more than revenge. They were closure. For years, I felt like I didn't exist in my own family. But standing there telling the truth in front of everyone, I reclaimed that space. I showed them that I had been here all along, that I was worthy of being seen. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't in shouting or fighting back. It's in proving calmly and clearly that you were worth something all along. And that night, I finally did.